Oh, do you see this bar?
Oh,
That says status. Yes.
This
it says we're 75% live.
Oh my gosh, so slow. Hello, everyone. I'm Marable from Employee Cycle, and you are watching the Technically Introduced conference, and you are here with us where we're going to be discussing where does people operations go from here. So if you're interested in HR, people operations, all things, how to make sure you have the best workforce possible, then you are in the right place. So what we're going to do is introduce the panelists, and we're going to introduce everybody by giving them quick 15, 30 seconds to introduce themselves. So I am going to start this off as an example of how we can keep this short and sweet. So hello, I'm Bruce Marable, CEO of Employee Cycle. We're an HR analytics dashboard company that helps all HR leaders manage all their data by pulling it from all their different software systems and managing it in one unified place. And so now I'm going to pass it off to Talia Edmundson to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Talia Edmundson. I'm the founder and principal of HRnB Consulting, which is an HR consulting firm that supports startups and small businesses.
All right. And then we're going to go to Tamara Rasberry.
Thank you, Bruce. My name is Tamara Rasberry. I am a director of HR and operations for a nonprofit organization in Washington, D.C. I also have my own company where I work with organizations to help them create mental health friendly workplaces.
All right. And last but not least, my friend Everett Reese.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Everett Reese, co-founder of Jane.HR. We work with growing organizations and really help them optimize and manage their recruitment processes around candidate experience, as well as really helping build more and more diverse talent pipelines.
All right. So let's start this off with a little fun before we get into the very all-important topic of people operations. And I first want to ask everyone, what was the one thing that you either started binging or the new thing that you started doing on a consistent basis during the pandemic? So I'm going to go in reverse order and start with Everett. Ev, what were you doing? What was the new thing that you just couldn't stop doing during the pandemic?
I've gotten into podcasting, actually, which speaks to this crazy microphone and headphones. So working on a few projects that are in stealth mode right now.
All right. Stealth Secret Podcast for Ev. All right. Talia, what were you doing during the pandemic?
Trying to find fun at home. So we started doing, and I say we because it was like a team effort with the husband, trying to make themes for the weekend. So we still had something to look forward to. We love food and missed restaurants a ton. So we got into the habit of trying to cook things we never did before, pairing it with a cocktail, making simple syrups. Like, had no idea there were 6 different kinds of mint. So we stayed busy in that way. So I guess got into cooking things that we never really did before.
All right. Tamara, what were you doing? Were you baking bread or making all?
Absolutely not. I feel somewhat underaccomplished because I did nothing different than I usually was doing. Pandemic life was like my regular life. So that's all. I just stayed home, watched Netflix, chill.
What was your favorite show? What was
Netflix and chill alone.
What was your favorite pandemic show on Netflix?
Oh gosh, I watched so many. Oh, okay, lie. I did start watching Nollywood movies. So, movies that come out of Nigeria. So I started watching a lot of Nigerian movies, which a lot of them happen to be about weddings for some reason. But I did start watching those. I usually just watch a lot of kind of murder shows. So, anywho.
All right, and just adding my 2 cents, prior to COVID, I was an avid boxer at a boxing gym called Everybody Fights. Clearly, it shut down during the pandemic, and sadly, I think it actually shut down afterwards. but I was one of those people that bought into the home fitness equipment hype. And so I went and bought Fight Camp. And so now my whole workout life has been 99% home, except for the one time every so often where I'll jog. But now every morning, or almost every morning, I'm boxing at home. Fight Camp is amazing. All right, so let's go into the topic. Today we're talking about where does people operations go from here? And one of the things that I always hate when I'm listening to a panel or a podcast or any type of talk is where people just go right into the topic without actually defining what are they talking about in the first place so that everybody's on the same page. And so what I would like for all of you to help me and our audience understand is, what is people? You know, over the years, we went from all of these different HR roles with the term HR or human resources in the title. And so you had your VP of HR, your CHRO, your director of HR. And then all of a sudden, over the past 5 years, then you get all these titles like people and culture experience, chief people officer. What does that even mean? And is it the same thing? Is it something totally different? And so Talia, I want to get your take on what is people operations? Is it different? Is it just HR trying to have a new cute name to rebrand themselves? What's going on here?
Yes, I think that is partially where it came from. So, for a while, human resources, I think, was originally a derivative of personnel, as the function tried to be more than someone who was just doing paperwork. So as that kind of evolved into human resources, along with it came some of, I think, the old guard interpretation of what this group of people was supposed to be doing, and not all of it was great. To be honest, there's people doing the work that probably shouldn't be doing the work. That's a heck of a way to start off this panel. My bad. But I think part of that comes with, like you said, Bruce, a little bit of like a rebranding. And if that's what's going to make folks, kind of look at the function differently and truly use the people that are doing the work as a resource, great. Because whatever it takes to help build that relationship is truly what you need to do. Make folks not afraid to use the function as the resource that it is supposed to be. And I think that's where kind of people operations came into the mix, which if you're going to use people operations, that's when you go into the people and culture. And typically, if that's the title of your function, there's a chief people officer in the mix. So what I've seen is like for a consistency standpoint, if you're going to use human resources or HR, the titles that those folks in the function have align with the name of the department. So for, like I said, a consistency standpoint, you've got people operations, people and culture, or you've got, human resources, traditional titles.
I work with a lot of different companies on the hiring front. How are you seeing different industries use the terms HR and people ops? And do you see this spilling over in recruitment as well? So is it people hiring, or are those titles still recruiting and talent acquisition? What are you seeing in your world?
Yeah, certainly I see, people ops being more prevalent in the tech space. Though we did have a manufacturing client that was, they kind of went the people ops route with the CPO and so forth. But by and large, I see it more in the more on the tech side. And when it comes to like recruiting titles, I mean, I still see mostly like talent acquisition, recruiting, more traditional titles still. Like though sometimes I feel like I'm starting to see more like talent experience titles that are sort of bleeding into recruitment and candidate experience. I actually did a LinkedIn search. I was curious, and I saw that when I do a people operations title search on job titles, now obviously this impacts my network itself, but I have a heavily HR network. But I got 15,000 people that came up with people operations, where we're still 1.4 million people with human resources, just to, I think, give us a sense of, it's still very much weighted to HR. But I think more progressive companies that are more innovative or trying to portray themselves as more innovative are embracing a people ops title. But just to give a sense of like, I still think things are heavily still anchored in the HR titles.
Tam, piggyback off of what Ev was saying about this spectrum of HR, where typically everyone has, or most people have an HR title, and this people ops role is growing. For the individuals and the professionals that you see and you talk to that have a people ops role, do you find these individuals to be fundamentally different types of people and managing different types of roles? Or do you see it typically being the same, but just a new title?
What I have seen is when companies create like a people and culture department, like they transition from calling it human resources to people and culture, and then they create like a director or a chief of people and culture, they tend to be including the same stuff that they were including as HR, but then also adding more of like a people-centric focus as well. So kind of they'll have to do all those things that you had to do as an HR person, but then outside of just being solely, strategic and compliance and everything, you're focusing on the people experience as well.
Just piggybacking off what Tamara was saying. I see people ops kind of being this trend where human, under the umbrella of human resources is moving more and more towards taking on more and more ownership and collaboration with senior executives in responsibilities of workforce success and how value is created in the actual firm itself, as well as more responsibility for even just like the holistic employee experience, which I know we're going to get into conversations around mental health and so forth. And even this, and COVID certainly has accelerated that, for instance, as organizations transition to remote, well, in terms of how that's going to happen and how people are in the norms that get established in that environment, a lot of that's falling on HR or people ops. And I feel like people ops is sort of like capturing that trend towards this more almost like cross-functional, holistic involvement. So, which is kind of like, I think sometimes people need to pause, maybe people ops need to pause, like, how much responsibility do we want to take on? Because it's when you actually look at it, and it's a lot.
And then don't forget all the HR people who suddenly since last year had to become DEI experts. So they got to take that on too.
So that's a good.
And should they have?
Sure.
Just there's HRnB's one of the top HR podcasts is called All Things Work. So here's like a list of some of the episode titles. More recently, transgender workers, resilience at work, toxic masculinity, COVID-19 fatigue, English language training, racism in corporate America. Looking at the top sales podcasts, they don't have, they're like, how can we sell more? Here's how to sell more. So it's like, when you look at the topics of what people are trying to solve and what they're thinking about, I think HR's or people ops is turning into the most holistic function in terms of the problems at work that are trying to solve for and address.
I would agree with what everyone said. From my perspective, when we're talking to customers and just the industry at large, what we found is that HR seems to still be in this legacy role of tactical work around managing all the granular details of the employee in the workforce, whereas people ops is really raising our hands and signaling that they're this combination of strategy, process, and technology. And from what we've heard from other HR leaders, it's really around HR and human resources, which a lot of people have said the cliche that humans are not resources, but that similar to how you have sales operations and marketing operations, people side should be operationalized as well, hence people ops. But Tamara, you mentioned DEI, which sparked a conversation that everybody had comments about. And so I know that was one of the challenges that, and we're going to just use people ops as a catch-all for people ops, HR, everyone who worked in this role. During COVID, and during the pandemic, which we're still not totally out of, but in the middle of the pandemic, people ops were stressed the hell out. They had more work to do than anyone could basically manage. And it was the combination of stress from people being at home and mental health and burnout and DEI and so many things at the same time. But I want to get your take on, what do you think were some of the biggest things and biggest challenges that people ops dealt with, and how do you think they did?
I would say even before all of that, there were a lot of people who had to lay off people, do a lot of layoffs and employment terminations. So of course, that's stressful for the employee, but it's also stressful for the HR person, the people ops person, because most of us don't want to have to lay off or term a lot of people. You know, companies didn't know where they were going to be able to go because no one knew how long the pandemic was going to last and things like that. So there was dealing with that, and then going into the piece about being at home. If you were at home working from home versus if you were at home because you couldn't work are two different dynamics. And so as a people ops person, I'll use myself as an example. One of the things that we had to be tasked with was, okay, now we're all working remotely. How do you make that work for the people who maybe never wanted to work remotely or don't really work well remotely, right? Even though technically your job can be done that way, it's not for everyone. And then, you know, you transition into how are we going to make sure that we meet all our goals and that we have, you know, all the things. And then also, but try not to get Zoom fatigue and all these things. So on top of the stuff that we were already having to do, then we're transitioning into how to show our people how to work a different way, you know, than they're used to. And we're all thinking, at least I know I was going into this, that it was going to be 2 weeks, 3 weeks max. And it ended up being a year. And so you do have those issues with mental health as well. Some people go to work for their socialization. Like some people don't have a lot of friends outside of work. Work is where they meet people, where they talk, where they chit chat. And when they couldn't do that, you know, they get into a really low place, that, you know, you're really isolated. And if you don't have friends or family near you that you could have in your bubble, it becomes even more isolating. So, you know, we're having to make sure that you touch base with your people. And I always recommend that you touch base with your people on a regular basis so that if something pops up, you'll notice it. You'll notice the change in behavior. You'll notice if their productivity is down or something like that. But you had to be even more on top of it from a remote standpoint. So I think, you know, a lot of that, I think from my perspective, a lot of us handled it well. I've spoken to quite a few people whose companies have performed better last year than they did before. So that says that, you know, we were doing our thing, but, you know, it's case by case.
You know, the problem with talking about this, especially in a 45-minute segment, is that there were so many things that happened that it's almost unfair to even pick some of the specific things and talk about them more, but we do only have 45 minutes. And so, Talia, I'm going to ask you, what do you think were the top 2 challenges that people ops leaders across the country, maybe even the world, but specifically in the US, were dealing with, and how do you think they did?
Well, that's a huge question. So the top 2 things that HR people were dealing with, I think was...
If you had to prioritize, what do you think were the most difficult challenges? Because there were so many. And we could really list them all, but we wouldn't have time to list them all. But if you could think about the top 2 that really threw people ops for a loop, where it either put them in a place where they were dealing with the most uncertainty they've ever dealt with, or they were dealing with something where they had the least amount of resources to be able to manage it. What do you think those things were?
The responses to everything that has been, that started after George Floyd's murder, and everything that followed after that, how to address protests, how to encourage people to get involved, how to make sure that people felt okay getting as involved as they wanted to. I think that was an area that, I mean, I've never dealt with that before, to be completely honest. And I think what's even more challenging is if you are not in an environment, but you're in people ops where no one's encouraging you to raise your hand and say that you don't know how to do something and where to go get the resources to fill in your knowledge gaps. It's a very scary time to figure out what was going, like the DOL did the best that they could, I think, with releasing guidance around and the CDC and, how to work safely and, what you were doing with PPP loans and laying people off. Like there was just like work in general that needed to be managed. And then on top of that, you have this enormous psychological component that you can't so specifically address to meet every single individual's needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was a little bit scary for people who, again, if you're not in the environment that allows you to raise your hand and ask for help, you just didn't know what to do. So I think on top of just trying to do your job every day, not knowing how to do what was asked of you, I think became incredibly difficult for people in the function. On top of, so I guess like the two things, right?
Well, actually, you know what? We can double down there because
Sure,
what
totally.
happened after Floyd was, had such a major impact and effect on everyone, whether you worked in people ops or not. And you made a comment earlier where you said there are certain things like DEI where you have to ask, should people ops even be responsible for that? So my question to you is, should people ops be responsible for DEI in all of it, coming up with it, implementing it? Should there be another person responsible for it? Should companies have already had someone in place or moving forward? Should all companies have someone in place that specifically focuses on D&I so that as unfortunately new things happen, there's already somebody to be there, but then also to keep it from just being a moment, we can keep this as a movement? What does that look like? Or should companies—
Can I answer this?
Just that. Go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
First of all, I'm so glad that's how you brought that up, because as soon as I stopped talking, I said, dang, I only talked about COVID. I didn't talk about the social justice. So I'm so glad that you brought that up. I would say, another thing I've been seeing over the past year is a lot of kind of back and forth between DEI professionals and HR professionals. There's kind of this HR, you don't know DEI. Well, you just know DEI, you don't know HR. And I feel like we don't have to be that way. It could be kumbaya, HR, DEI. What I don't think, though, is that because someone is successful in HR, automatically makes them understand how to do DEI work.
That part.
And so if that's the direction that you're trying to go with your company and you're trying to really make lasting impact, yes, I do think you should hire someone or consult out to someone who knows how to do that work. I don't think it's fair at all to ask, people in your organization, create like a DEI team of people who know nothing about DEI work and think that they're going to be able to reach the goals and everything that you're trying to reach. Like, to me, that's almost comical. That's almost like, oh, you just want to say you did something. If you really want to do the work, you need to reach out to someone who knows how to do the work.
We started the conversation describing or defining what our version of human resources was, or people operations. But at the start of, the whatever you want to call it, humans and people, right? Start off whatever you're going to call the function. And there are so many things that happen to people. You cannot half-ass this work. You can't. And I think making sure that you understand if you're in the function, so like the future of this role needs to be full of people that understand where their knowledge gaps are and are brave enough to pass the mic and get out of the way so that you don't mess up. None of us know how to do absolutely everything to the degree that it deserves to be met. And I think making sure that you understand how to phrase to your leadership if they're asking you to do something and you know that you don't have the skill set to do it, say like, listen, I need a budget, or can you give me some more time so I can figure out either what I need to learn, who I need to bring in. Like, be brave enough to say, this is too big for me, or I don't know, and we cannot mess this up. So please give me the resources to make sure that we do this well. And if that means hiring someone, if that means bringing in a consultant for a period of time, go do that instead of trying to piece it together, because it's humans, right? It's people. So it's someone's life as it feels at work. And you need to make sure that you do that well.
I hope everybody was ready for a real ass panel here, because not holding any punches, being very candid here, which I love. So Ev, you specialize in helping companies hire, source, attract the best talent possible. And after George Floyd, and hopefully this will continue to be a trend, a lot of companies are now putting a lot of efforts around diversity recruiting and pushing DEI into the talent acquisition process. What are you seeing now from a recruiting standpoint in regards to companies putting a DEI impact or DEI focus on recruiting? And candidly speaking, how many companies do you actually see really going all the way through this process to make sure that it's not just a lip service, but it's actually something that's making a difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, before George Floyd, I think the nature, we work with a lot of nonprofits and tech organizations. So I would say this was something that was already on the radar and part of a lot of discussions as we were kicking off hiring plans and hiring processes. But like during this period of time, everything kind of accelerated in terms of the pace of change, right? So after George Floyd, probably 90% of our clients, like, this is just a major part of our conversations as we're going into talking through, okay, what does your hiring plan look like this year? But hey, what does the current team look like? Where are we unbalanced across the board in different functions at different levels? So there's a lot of conversations around that, and now, very intentional recruitment efforts around recruitment efforts, as well as process tweaks. So, like, for instance, some of our clients, we won't begin the phone interview or interview processes until we have a truly diverse slate of candidates, for instance, so that you don't get too far down the road and then all of a sudden you just have this super homogenous group of candidates before you start. So there's tweaks like that. To be frank, there are some clients that are like, personally, I like a long-term systematic approach that's going to get us to where we want to go in a long-term way. Like, I do feel like there's some conversations where it feels like somebody's trying to, it's like, we want to be diverse yesterday and whatever that means, but it's really impact. To me, it's, in some cases, there's pressure to me to jeopardize the integrity of the process, if that makes sense. Because it's basically like, we want this person because this is going to look better on our team page. Okay, so nobody's said that specific thing to me, but it's like, I can see I understand where people are trying to go, but sometimes I feel like people are trying to short circuit things to quickly get an end result. So it's been challenging to work through some of those things, because we all want this. We're in this together, working towards the same ends, but want to do things with integrity in a compliant, legal way. That's so yeah, it's been super rewarding. I do think when I look at the people that are getting put in different positions right now, it's been rewarding to see the outcomes of that work. But there have been a lot of challenging conversations with internally as a team, with clients, and so forth. Sorry, I think sorry for that long-winded answer.
No, it's all good. And to double down on that, our company, we're an HR analytics company, and we're always analyzing all data, especially around recruiting and looking at the different drop-off rates in the funnel around diversity in regards to recruiting. And we found that the easiest part of the work is to actually attract diverse candidates. Now, that's not to say that all companies are doing it, but we found that that's typically the easiest part. The hardest part and the real work starts where you start doing things like remove unconscious bias from hiring managers, so that when that person actually shows up in a Zoom interview or in person, that they actually get a fair shot. And so I'm curious, how many of the companies, or not a number, but generally speaking, what are you typically seeing the companies that you're working with trying to fix that problem, so that as you give them this great diverse candidate pool, they now are actually set up for success to actually be able to hire these diverse candidates?
Yeah, but it can't stop at hiring. That's one of the things that people get wrong is, okay, now we've hired these people. Now our staff isn't 100% vanilla, but how do you make them feel when they get there? Are they included in things? Is there a sense of belonging? Just getting them in the door, if you don't make sure that, it's a good situation when they're there, they're going to go right back out the door. And then you defeated your whole purpose. So diversity is good, it's great, it's needed, but people have to realize you can't stop there.
Definitely. And before we go to the next topic, Ev, did you have anything else to say about that in regards to what you see companies doing for making employees included and giving that equity so that they stay, or that they even get hired in the first place after you actually have sourced them and done the work of bringing them to the table?
Yeah, I think the only thing I was going to add is that I think that's kind of the important trend, even with the idea of people ops playing this greater and greater role in truly like partnering with leaders, the executive team, leaders in all different parts of the organization. Because like when you look at diversity, equity, inclusion, that ownership, especially if a company is large enough to have a DEI function, obviously the ownership and outcomes are going to fall on that function. But in one sense, it's important that everybody has some level of ownership in those goals and that value, so that your hiring managers and people that are making decisions on hires, but also promotions and so forth, are aligned around that. So I think it's important that sort of is truly part of the culture and values of the organization in a way that's truly embraced by, the actual managers out in the field that are doing the work or managing the work, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
So Tamara, you were just talking about and referencing employees staying into transition into turnover.
Okay.
We're experiencing a ton of turnover right now. The economy is in such a weird and interesting place where you have so many people that are out of work, yet the companies that are trying to hire very specialized roles, whether it's engineers or even trucking or nurses, we have huge, massive shortages where the larger companies are paying 2-3 times the salary to poach people from different companies. I mean, the turnover is just, it's right now. And at the same time, people are burnt the hell out. People are stressed. Everybody's eating like crazy. We're all buying overpriced and expensive workout equipment. Everybody's retrofitting their home. I heard a podcast the other day where this seed company is out of stock of seeds for the next 9 months because too many people are doing home gardens.
Gardening.
It's just insane. We're just trying to figure out whatever we could do. Netflix at an all-time high. We're just trying to figure out how can we stay sane, and work is a big part of that. And so what do you think is the role of people ops in trying to make sure that people feel motivated, people are inspired and encouraged to still do the work? You're stressed out, you have all these external factors, but at the same time, you still need to hold up the same level of performance, which seems to be, something that's not necessarily fair, but life isn't fair, I assume, and you just got to still do the work regardless of what's happening in your life. So as a people ops leader, how do you make sure that you can make sure that employees feel safe and that they're taken care of, but at the same time, you're not adding to their burnout and their stress that everyone is experiencing from all of these other external factors?
I think the key is communication. Communicating to your staff that it's okay to take a break. It's okay to use your vacation, even though you couldn't really actually go anywhere. Use your vacation to go from your bedroom to your living room. Take the time off. Take breaks during the day if you need to. I told my staff, I realized that this is not a normal situation. So I certainly don't expect you to be acting like it's a normal situation. A lot of people had to homeschool while they're actually also having to work and, having to be stuck in the house with people they might not want to be around 24/7. It was a lot going on. So to me, the best outcome would be not to say just, okay, the work still has to get done, but to say, I understand if maybe, you have to do your work at night instead of during the day. Or I understand if you have to take a break during the day. I understand, just kind of being flexible. To me, it's about communication, flexibility. So communicating to staff about what's going on as far as, a lot of people were concerned about when their offices were going to reopen, keep them up to date about that, keep them up to date about what type of procedures and protocols you're going to have in place, but also just, during the whole process, keep people up to date, talk to them, check in on how they're doing, let people know that it's okay if you need a break, it's okay if you can't, function today, because we're all going through it. One of the things I really hate about some leaders act like they're not going through anything. Like, we're all going through it, but they can't understand why we feel troubled. Because for some reason, I guess these things don't impact them, right? Don't listen to her. So I think that now we really shouldn't necessarily have to do anything different than we were doing before. Like, if you have to completely switch up your plan to get people to stay now, then that means they didn't want to stay before and they only stayed because it was COVID. Like, you should have already been doing these things. And to me, the key is really management training, because people do not leave an organization because of their people ops people. They leave it because of their managers. That's just the facts. I've never had nobody say, oh, I would stay here if it wasn't for this horrible HR. Like, they don't say that. It's the people that they deal with day in and day out, the managers. So they're the ones who are, to me, most responsible for getting people to want to stay in their roles.
Talia, I'm sure you have some thoughts about this. I mean, over the past few years, companies have been preaching mindfulness. They've been preaching mental health. Now I think we're moving into this term corporate wellness, all these different names and terms, which almost sound like the same thing. What's going on? How should people ops think about this? Where does the line start between where does the line end, and do you draw the line between what a company can do for a person to help them versus what a person needs to do for themselves? That seems to be an issue right there. So what are your thoughts?
I think approaching things from an organizational programming perspective is, again, from a consistency standpoint, a good thing. And then trying to figure out how to offer individual programs that tie into whatever your overall strategy is going to look like. And what I mean by that is trying not to force people to do all the same stuff, because not everybody likes all the same stuff. The online happy hour took off, and it should not have. It just shouldn't.
The unhappiest hour ever.
Like, you're already in front of the computer. If you haven't discovered hide self view and the revelation that is, because when you were in the office, you weren't staring in a mirror while you were talking. So turn off your camera. Anyway, not everyone drinks. And if your goal was to keep people together and make them go onto the internet to do that, come up with something different so that you're not making people feel silly or, excluded because they don't do what everyone else does. Do coffee and donuts. Have someone take you on a tour of their neighborhood if they feel like they want to, show themselves walking their dog. Those are like weird examples. But my point is, it can't be one size fits all. So if you had the opportunity to know your folks beforehand, try to figure out what it is that's going to speak to them. Do people want to do cooking classes online? To Tamara's point, work was some of the biggest social component for people who don't have a lot of friends and connections outside of work. So if your goal is to try to keep everyone feeling like they're together, there are a lot of activities that you can do online that don't make people feel like they're being excluded. In terms of all, mental health and resources around that, I think, even during COVID, because we've been in this for so long, everyone had the opportunity to go through open enrollment to some degree. So looking at what your programs have, advertising some of those underutilized resources, because folks don't always know what benefits are available to them and that they're free. telemed or telehealth, whatever you want to call it, started to waive copays in the middle of all of this. So people could stay home, figure out how to stay well physically and mentally without going to the doctor. Look at your programs, advertise what's available at no cost. And if you do a good job of that, there are a lot of resources that you can still get in the next year for free through credits. So, and when you talk about people operations, like really getting into the operational aspects of the function, this is what, I think about from an operator standpoint, constantly looking at programs and evaluating what it is that you think might speak to more than one person, but also taking the time to really know the ins and outs of everything that it is you have to offer, so that if you do have that one person that has a very specific need, you do know how to address it. So you're not flying so high that you're missing what's happening at a micro level, but you can still figure out how to get in touch with and speak to the folks that, need the resources depending on what's going on.
And then Ev, from a hiring standpoint, what kind of expectations are you seeing companies tell new candidates? As new candidates are coming to the workforce, people have told me that when they're interviewing now, they'll just straight up tell a company, "Hey, if I can't work from home, I'm not going to do it. This is a non-starter." So what kind of things do you hear companies saying in the interviews now? Like, "Oh, we're going to make sure that you're taken care of and that you get breaks and that you won't burn out." Do you hear companies proactively saying these things in the interview and as they're marketing their job opportunities, or is that typically happening during onboarding after the person is hired?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting because, so at a base level, especially, and again, I'll talk more within the tech sector, companies like our client base that either is intending on staying 100% remote first, it's a lot easier. Like companies that are saying, "Hey, we're remote right now, but we are going to be planning on coming back to the office at some level." Like it's much harder to find people that are looking for that. Now, at the same time, interestingly enough, there are some people that want to have the option of something that's a little bit more hybrid. Like they want to feel like, hey, there's some hub that I can go to when I do want to get out of the house. So I think we are seeing more of that, but there's this weird dynamic between a small percentage of people, at least right now, vocalizing, "Hey, I want a place to be able to go." But then this larger percentage of people that are just like, "Hey, if it's not remote, if it's not 100% remote, let's not talk." So it's going to be interesting to see how companies are trying to cater to both those options. And I'm sure that problem is already, that challenge is already falling on people ops. I do think the other interesting thing is everything, especially in the tech sector, was very much engineered around, like when you look at incentives and the brand that companies were portraying, especially going before COVID, it's very much targeting one, millennials, and two, kind of the stereotypical, like very social ping pong beer orient, as sort of like the archetypes or stereotypes. But hopefully we're done talking about how are we going to bring millennials into the workforce and we move on to Gen Z and can start figuring that out, because those desires and motivations are actually different, in a way more linked to their parents are Gen Xers. So more linked to things around security, financial incentives, learn like targeted skill development and so forth. So it's important that I think we reassess, like, okay, our incentives and how we're portraying ourselves as a brand, as an employer, like how well is that actually in line to both the current environment and reality that we're transitioning to in this, I don't know, we're not post-COVID, maybe this
next phase.
COVID purgatory, maybe we're floating somewhere.
It's all, think of it all as phases, right? You're going from one phase to the next phase to the next phase.
Yeah. So the phase we're in, and then this Gen Z that we actually have to start figuring out, what are they actually looking for? So
See, I happen to take issue with that. I'm not a fan of the whole trying to figure out what a specific generation needs. If you want to hire people, figure out what people need. Okay, figure out what you're looking for. I don't think we should focus only on Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z. Like, to me, that's so disrespectful. The past 5-10 years, we've been talking only about millennials, and a lot of us are not millennials, but we still work. And I still want all the same stuff. I want to work from home. I want bonuses, and I want y'all to pay for my parking. I want all the same stuff that the millennials want. Okay, so let's not focus on generations and just focus on who's the best person for the job. That's my 2 cents. Sorry, I got a little animated about that.
And I'm going to put in a word to the technically team for next year's Introduce for us to talk about that, because I think that that's a really interesting topic. But to end this panel, I want to ask all of you to give a 30-second final words and saying around what is your hope for the People Ops role moving forward? And so in 30 seconds or less, let's start with you, Ev. Where should People Ops be moving to? What is your hope for the role in the industry?
I hope we just give up the AI, we give up the electronic paperwork, we become more Luddites, just shut now. Maybe that's me reacting to moving out to a farm during the pandemic, but no, I think that, this may sound overly nerdy, but I kind of would like to see the research to practice bridge crossed faster, in terms of as People Ops truly becomes more and more impactful in how it's influencing organizations, how work is designed, how people are actually doing work. It's really important that those things, those practices truly are rooted in what we're seeing actually works, because it's easy to implement things that actually backfire, even though the intentions are really, really good. And there's some really, on everything from DEI practices to training and development. When you Google hard questions, it's the scholarly journal articles and that stuff and HBR type stuff that comes up at the top. You don't really, the SHRM stuff doesn't. And I'm not sure how much the actual really interesting stuff is truly, the time is taking for it to bleed into practices, and those decision-making processes can take too long. So that's where I'd like to see it go.
Got it. Tamara, 30 seconds or less. What do you want people to know? What is your hope for the industry?
My hope is that more employers start to see how important HR really is to the organization, to the people. There's still so many that look at the function as transactional, and it doesn't give us the opportunity to be as impactful as we could be. So my hope is that we move away from employers thinking of HR as just hire, fire, and let us be what we really should be, which is helping strategize and plan and work with all things that deal with people. But I also want to see us moving into that more people experience role, and not just comp benefits and things like that. But like Everett was saying earlier, the holistic approach to the employee. I would like to see that.
Awesome.
And
Talia, let's take us home.
Similar to what Tamara was saying, my hope is that what HR or people operations has been able to accomplish under, some pretty intense circumstances over the last 14, 15 months. Whatever we did that was great gets to stay front of mind for leadership, especially if the function didn't really have the respect that it deserved prior to everything taking a pretty hard left. So whatever you did well, maximize and try to figure out how to stay front of mind for people who, now that you have their attention, you get to keep their attention. Conversely, take a healthy inventory of maybe what you didn't do so well and figure out how to make that better going forward. Because at the end of all of this, you're part of the people that you're serving, basically, from an organizational standpoint. And there's always ways that we can get better. So healthy mix of introspection, but doubling down on where you really crushed it, and stay front of mind for leadership.
Awesome. I agree with all of you. And just to give my final words, I'm hoping that HR becomes the most data-driven department of every company, because CEOs and execs always say that people are their greatest asset, yet we found that's the area where they know the least about. We really want HR to use data to be able to support all the things they're doing so they can make smarter and more actionable decisions. But with that being said, I want to thank all of you for being great panelists and for making me seem like a much better moderator than I am. I really appreciate it. And so if we go through really quick, and if all of you could just tell people where you could be found, then we could end this thing. So Talia, where can people find you online?
HRnBconsulting.com, or my email address is talia@HRnBconsulting.com.
Awesome. Tamara, where can people find you online?
Rasberryconsulting.com, but there's no P in my name, so just make sure Rasberry with no P. Also LinkedIn, Twitter, anywhere you want to find me. But my website where you can reach all my other socials is rasberryconsulting.com.
Ev, where can people find you?
Jane.HR, and you can email me at ev@jane.hr, or just connect with me on LinkedIn.
And I can be found at employeecycle.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and my email is bruce@employeecycle.com. So thank you all for being amazing.
Thank you.
We packed a whole bunch of information into 45 minutes. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but we did it. Give yourself a round of applause. And with that, thank you. And everyone, thank you so much for coming here to learn more about where does people operations go from here. I hope you learned something. I hope this was the candid, entertaining, informative panel that you hoped for. And hopefully you enjoy the rest of the conference. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.